Hello, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And I haven't missed one single fat disorder conference. So I'm really happy. I was at the very first one in 2008 in Chicago. So today I'm going to talk to you about mitochondrial health, mast cell activation, which you've heard a lot about already, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what to eat, what to avoid, supplements to take, and also the brain and the lymphatic system. I have nothing to disclose, and what we're going to be doing is learn about mast cell activation, recognize the diseases associated with them, identify diet and supplements, describe mitochondrial syndrome activation and oxidative stress, and be able to know the importance of the brain. And as you know, with Dercum's and with lipedema too, there's a lot of brain fog. I have lipedema myself, stage 1. I never progressed. I've had it since I'm probably 20 years old. And I am very dedicated to helping this community. I have a private practice. I've been practicing for over 30 years. And I work with a lot of patients more and more over the years with chronic illness. So the mast cell activation really, really intrigued me because I work with a lot of Lyme patients as well, and they all have mast cell. And then to find out that mast cell can really be prevalent in Dercum's as well, and some of the lipedema patients as well. So we know about that, lipedema and Dercum's, and then Ehlers-Danlos loss, and many patients with Dercum's have Ehlers-Danlos loss. So we're going to be talking about that and some studies that I've found connecting it as well. We all know what Dercum's disease is and the different symptoms that come from Dercum's disease. And it's also been associated with many other symptoms, which actually you'll see very overlap with the mast cell. Sleep cycles, headaches, cognitive difficulties, tachycardia, shortness of breath, and gastrointestinal symptoms. It can be confused with lipedema or multiple lipomatosis, and it's also misdiagnosed as obesity or fibromyalgia. We've already heard today a lot about fibromyalgia, stress, obesity, and so everything I'm going to be talking about correlates with everything that has already been said. Dercum's disease, there's pain and there's fatigue. Mast cell activation syndrome is important in the angioma type of Dercum's disease, but it can also be in other diseases. Dr. Herbst reclassified some of the stages of Dercum's disease, and angioma type is one of them. So mast cell activation is considered an associated condition in connective tissue, in Dercum's disease. This is the connective tissue. There's proteoglycans in there, collagen, elastin, mucopolysaccharides, and you can see the mast cell in the connective tissue. We already discussed what the mast cells are and how they activate. So I'll go quickly over these, but they're immune cells that reside within the tissues to completely respond to injury, and they release many chemical mediators, which Dr. Afrin discussed a lot of. They play an important role in the immune system, and when they become overactive, they lose specificity to the response, and they can be involved in allergies. Mast cell activation disease, we already heard a lot about that, but just to remind you, it's not the same as allergies. There's a sudden release of histamine with mast cell activation disease. Allergic events, which are different, are mediated by IgE antibodies. So just to remember that distinction, and I think I'm going to say that again in one of the other slides, just to remind you of that. So I found a study linking Ehlers-Danlos loss with mast cell disease, and it's a very rare connective tissue disease, and it's also linked to Chiari malformation, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and mast cell activation. And POTS, many patients have POTS. Many of my Lyme patients have mast cell activation and POTS. And as Dr. Herbst discussed, there is an overlap between Dercum's and Lyme disease. I've already sent quite a number of patients to Dr. Herbst who came to me with Lyme disease, and I diagnosed them with Dercum's. So we know that there is this link. And Ehlers-Danlos is a connective tissue disease, and a proportion of people with hypermobile type Ehlers-Danlos do have mast cell activation. And I put the research studies at the bottom, and you'll be able to get the slides so you can check out all these research things to see. And this is about the intercellular matrix, which is the extracellular matrix, which plays an important role in the connective tissue. And the mast cells can stick to the extracellular matrix, which then can alter the behavior. And so I find it really interesting to see how this actually works and how the mast cells affect the connective tissue, which is the extracellular matrix, and how that impacts Ehlers-Danlos. So there is this connection between mast cells, connective tissue, and mast cell activation disease. These are just some of the diseases that are associated with mast cell activation. I have so many patients with mast cell activation and have more and more coming to me, and others that I suspect have it and needing to be diagnosed. There's POTS, dysbiosis, diabetes, fibromyalgia, and Ehlers-Danlos, and also the tick-borne diseases. We no longer really say Lyme because there's so many co-infections, so we call it tick-borne diseases. The symptoms of mast cell activation, Dr. Afrin covered this. Many, all different parts of the body can be affected. And this I thought I'd like to share with you on the skin. The dry eyes and red, itchy, and burning, runny noses. I've found that so many of my lipedema patients have dry eye symptoms, blepharitis, and I get that as well. So I've started asking more and more patients. But with the mast cell on the skin, hives, itching, swelling, brown spots, itchiness, and then the dermatographism, where you actually see that on the skin, and it can last up to 30 minutes. Mast cell activation is active in angiolipoma type Dercum's disease, and the mast cell burden in angiolipomas have systemic effects, including flushing, itching, nausea, diarrhea. So we really need more and more studies and what to do and how are we going to treat this. The mast cells participate in chronic low-grade inflammation within the adipose tissue. So there's so much more that we need to find out and discover. Mast cells also can stimulate fibrosis proliferation. Serine protease tryptase is released during the granulation. So a tryptase test can be a useful indicator in mast cell activation. Obesity. Mast cells are immune cells known for their role in inflammation and fibrotic diseases. Obesity is a disease characterized by white adipose tissue and systemic inflammation. So this is a study that I've listed there, that mast cells are actually activated in human adipose tissue, and localized fibrosis deposits occur in the inflammatory state. So that's another interesting study. And treatments are needed to reduce the burden of the mast cells on the angiolipomas. You can use histamine 1 or histamine 2 receptor blockers, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and then antihistamines. We're going to cover a little bit more of this in the coming slides. Bioflavonoids such as quercetin or pycnogenol. Amphetamines can be used, and then I can't pronounce those names, but you can read it. And that's one of the third one. The imatinib is one that the doctor had spoken about, and I did not know that it was so expensive. So that has to change. So what do we want to do? We want to treat the biochemical mediators from mast cells. We want to reduce those. We want to reduce mold toxicity. Many of the patients have mold, and some of the doctors say until you treat the mold, you can't treat the Lyme and you can't treat the mast cell, and others say until you treat the mast cell, you can't treat the mold. So we need more information. And mast cell stabilizers are needed, and a low-histamine diet can be helpful, which we're going to talk about. So the diet for mast cell, it's recommended a phased approach. When you look at the things that you have to avoid, it's virtually impossible to avoid everything. So what we recommend is for 10 to 14 days, avoid the histamine high foods. You may have already found certain foods trigger you. And so what you do that, and then you can determine your histamine balance, and symptoms can be reduced by that diet that's low in histamines. These are some of the foods that are high in histamines. All the fermented foods, alcoholic beverages, sauerkraut, vinegar, and kefir and yogurt, and all the foods that we tell people to have for a healthy gut microbiome are actually not good because they trigger mast cell activation. So if you have mast cell activation or suspect you have, cut these foods out. When you add them back after 14 days, one by one, you'll be able to assess how you feel with that. Dried fruit, citrus fruit, aged cheese, mackerel, mahi-mahi, anchovies, and sardines. There are some fish that you can have. You want to actually avoid eating canned foods or ready meals. So we go back to fresh, pure, whole. And that's how I've lived my life for the last 50 years, whole, pure, and fresh. And if I can't understand anything on the label or there's terrible chemicals in, I don't eat it. It's not hard to do. It's your mind. You have to make up your mind. But alcohol and caffeine definitely are not good for histamines because they block the DAO enzyme, which I'm going to talk to you about. Always buy fresh products as much as possible, and don't let your foods linger too long. You don't have leftovers, which is really, you might be okay with it, but if you have really bad mast cell activation, that could be a problem. Do eat as much fresh, natural chemicals from food, fresh, organic, grass-fed meat, fresh organic fruit, except for strawberries and citrus, because those could activate mast cells, healthy greens, and you can have gluten-free grains such as rice, corn, millet, or oats, and the heavy oils, avocado, olive, coconut, nut, and seed oils. Avocado can be a histamine trigger, and it can be the other way, depends on the person. This is just an example of a low histamine diet, but you'll be able to read that when you get the information. Supplements that reduce mast cells, polyphenols. There's a polyphenol called luteolin, which is a flavonoid found in vegetables and fruits. Doesn't that look beautiful? All the different colors. You know, when I studied in the 80s with a man who was my mentor, he was a very famous naturopath, he used to tell us to eat a rainbow diet. And in those days, we didn't know that there were these active ingredients in them. And that's what you do. When you eat a rainbow diet, you're getting minerals from all the parts of the soil, you're getting different minerals and trace elements. So that's what you want to do. But celery, broccoli, carrots, peppers, cabbage, and apple skin, those can reduce mast cells. Other polyphenols are coumarin, not coumadin, coumarin, curcumin, anthocyanins, and quercetin. Red wine, but the red wine has got quercetin, it has got resveratrol in it, but that can trigger mast cell. Chocolate, tea, pomegranate, and fruit juices are high in that phenol. This is a very, very important one, and many, many years ago I had hives, and the doctors wanted to put me onto medication, and I researched and found quercetin, and it worked. And it turns out now that quercetin is recommended for the mast cell activation because it is a mast cell stabilizer. And it also promotes nitric oxide, which we need because we lippy people have leaky vessels, so the nitric oxide really helps as well. And quercetin has a negative effect on the signaling, and so that can be a really good thing to do for mast cells. There's a product called perilla seed extract, which is a supplement, and these are some medications that some of the doctors, if they know about mast cell, could prescribe. And then, so there's the ketofen, which is an H1 histamine blocker, and then cromolyn sodium. Berberine, which many of us take for lipedema, berberine actually normalizes blood sugar. And I've been taking berberine for about 10 years now, but it also helps suppress cell-mediated allergic responses. So there's some studies with that. This is an important enzyme when you're talking about mast cell activation. The DAO enzyme helps to break down excess histamine in the body. and it breaks down histamine-rich foods. And if you have a deficiency, you can have different chronic diseases. Reduced DAO levels can cause gastrointestinal disorders, headaches, dysmenorrhea, arrhythmias, hive, itchings, and flushings, which sounds like mast cell activation, right? Again, it's different from allergies. It's linked to not linked to one specific food, and it does not cause immune reactions. So that's the difference. Enhancing DAO function, fresh meat and fish, eggs, most vegetables, most fresh fruit, oils, and grains. These are some apps that you can get that will help you to track the histamines in your diet, and FODMAPs, and also foods that are high in DAO. So I thought that would be interesting. When you have alcohol, it inhibits the DAO, and then leaky gut, SIBO, and many of these things will decrease DAO. Many of my patients with Lyme have SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Maybe some of you have too. These are the histamine H1 and H2 receptor antagonists that you can have. And there was a natural one there too. Well, we'll do that afterwards. Mast cell activation, inflammation, oxidative stress, and mitochondrial dysfunction. Mitochondrial dysfunction is really important. It's prevalent in fibromyalgia and Dercums and many, many conditions. And all of these trigger mast cell activities. Inflammation, oxidative stress, which has to do with the reactive oxygen species in the mitochondria of the cell. And then there are damaged components in the mitochondria, and then that triggers mast cell. And glutathione depletion, which glutathione helps with the liver, that also helps to clear, then the body can't clear the free radicals. So the mitochondria are small parts of our cells that give us energy and reduce toxins, and they are part of the ATP cycle, which is the energy cycle of the body, and they don't function well in chronic disease, and that's why you're always so tired. Patients are always so tired. When those mitochondria are not functioning properly, there is fatigue. And any abnormality in the functions of the mitochondria will have the term called mitochondrial dysfunction. And that contributes to other metabolic disorders. I thought I would put this in. The average cell has 500 mitochondria. The average liver cell has 2,000 mitochondria, and kidney 4,000, and the heart cells have 10,000. So I think they're pretty important for our energy levels. And then there is a link between mitochondrial damage and cognitive dysfunction because of the reactive species that attack the tissues and cause oxidative damage. And we know that there is brain fog in our conditions, and what can we do to help with that? We want to help the mitochondria. We want to help to have foods that help with oxidative damage. And then we want to support the mitochondria with glutathione, which is actually also good for Dercums and for lipedema, NAC and acetylcysteine, which Dr. Herbst has been talking about for years and years and years, alpha-lipoic acid, vitamin C, nicotinamide riboside, and coenzyme Q10, and we're going to talk about those. I have to go fast now, I think. So glutathione offers antioxidant support to neutralize free radicals, and that's what we want to do. We want to neutralize free radicals so we do not have oxidative stress. And the NAC also offers antioxidant support and is essential for the formation of glutathione. It's actually a precursor to glutathione, and it supports the immune system as well. Alpha-lipoic acid also helps to fight free radical damage. And vitamin C is really important, and especially now as we're boosting our immune systems, it has antioxidant properties. It's an essential collagen supporter, and I like liposomal vitamin C. It penetrates the best, and you don't want to get ascorbic acid necessarily. Other supplements for mitochondrial health would be CoQ10 in the form of ubiquinol is the best, and it should be in not a tablet, in a liquid form. It also neutralizes free radicals and is essential for the mitochondria of the cell, CoQ10. Glycine is a small amino acid, and you take 1,000 milligrams of that, and I'm going to talk about that in a different slide. The NR is a precursor to NAD, and that is also the energy carrier, which declines with age. NR, it helps with cellular integrity, and it decreases DNA damage, and you can take 300 milligrams daily of that. The glycine supplementation decreased mitochondrial swelling and reactive oxygen species and lipid peroxidation, so it has very antioxidant effects. And it improves the mitochondrial membrane potential and restores liver mitochondrial ATP. So I think that's a really important supplement to include. Studies have shown that oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, and inflammation may play a role in the pathophysiology of fibromyalgia. And a few people today have spoken about fibromyalgia. This is so exciting. So I don't have the video of this, but Eva Sevic gave me permission to use this. Did you know we have lymphatics in the brain? And this is the endosign in green. And when you actually see that happening, you can see it moving from the brain. It surrounds the dura mater of the brain, goes behind the mastoid process, and enters into the lymph system, into the bloodstream at the supraclavicular fossa. It's very, very exciting. So we have this microglial system that it's called the glial lymphatic system that surrounds the dura mater of the brain and actually drains and helps with the lymphatics. And it's very, very important. And when you don't have enough sleep, your glial lymphatic system is not functioning properly and you're not detoxifying as you should. So you really, really want to get adequate sleep, which I'm sometimes guilty of staying up till 3 a.m. doing research and looking up these things like that I'm talking to you about. But you really have to do that and then if you keep your lymph flowing, because the less congested your cervical lymph nodes are, the better you're going to get drainage. I've been doing more and more massage on the head when I do my lymphatic work on my patients since the 2015 study, which showed that we have these lymphatics in the brain. I think it's really, really exciting. And the brain lymphatic drainage maintains the homeostasis of the brain. And it's just so important when it's impaired. We've got age-related functions and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and all kinds of other neuroinflammatory diseases can occur. Brain fog, of course, is always reported in Dercum's disease, and neurological and neuropsychiatric problems can dominate in people with Dercum's disease. Lack of sleep, as I already said to you, affects the glial lymphatic system, and the mitochondria, in fact, impact brain function and cognition. So, in summary, mast cell activation can cause dis-ease. We talk about dis-ease rather than disease. We want the body to be in homeostasis. Mast cell activation syndrome is linked with Dercum's, Ehlers-Danlos loss, and connective tissue disease, obesity, inflammation, and tick-borne disease. A low-histamine diet can help to reduce the symptoms. Flavonoids, enzymes, mast cell stabilizers can be helpful in the treatment of MCAS. And consider glutathione and acetylcysteine, alpha-lipoic acid, vitamin C, and NIR, or NAD. You can get that as well. Mitochondrial dysfunctional syndrome and mast cell activation create inflammation, oxidative stress, and are connected to Dercum's. The brain has a glial lymphatic system and drains to the lymphatic system. And obesity, insulin resistance, and metabolic syndrome are comorbidities of Dercum's. So I want to encourage all of you to really start eating a rainbow diet. And there was a study that came out about 2 years ago on the rainbow diet, an actual study. So please, I want to inspire you to eat a really, really healthy diet. That's the one thing that you can have control over. Thank you so much.
I just wanna love you.